and be laid off. So here goes, Ms. Lois, if you don't mind enlightening us.
Oh, I tell you, that vote on Tuesday is going to mean so much. And I'd like to talk about what's at stake. Voters need to know how they vote will impact things that will shock them. But first I want to say that, we've been hearing that Tuesday's vote is about bailing out the budget. Well, it's really about bailing out legislators. Legislators have a constitutional duty to balance the budget. They didn't, so they're in violation of their one basic constitutional duty. In fact, legislators haven't balanced the budget without gimmicks for 4 or 5 straight years. And they won't balance the budget in future years unless they fix the structural imbalance in how state tax revenues are allocated. And I'll go into that. But first, since people are kind of familiar, at least your audience, with the amendment, let me tell you the new things that I have learned today. First of all, this amendment is far more important than it appears. I mean, the legislators would have us understand that we must bail them out so they can balance budget. But there's much more to this amendment than just balancing the budget with a bailout. This amendment is a Trojan horse to make significant changes that will bust the trust. And that's why we have adopted the slogan for our education project, Bust the Trust. Let me tell you the 2 ways that this amendment will bust the trust, because I believe every conservative voter that understands this will flock to the polls to vote no. First of all, this amendment lops off 20% of the trust fund principal. This, of course, eliminates funds that earn interest and dividends to balance future budgets. Right now we're getting somewhere between $100 and $200 million every year to supplement our general fund budget. So by lopping off 20% of the principal, that's definitely going to reduce that amount. But the second way it busts the trust is that it also siphons off half the gas and oil reserves that flow into the trust fund. This could bankrupt the fund in a decade or so. Isn't that unbelievable? I mean, this is a Trojan horse. If the guy says, hey, we're short, in fact, I have the exact amount they say they're short, my finger on it here. Yes, they say that they are short $145.8 million in their $1.67 billion. So this is very serious, and I may come back to this. I want this. This amendment is a Trojan horse to make significant changes that will bust the trust. Now, something very important happened at the press conference today, and it's being asked by reporters and healthcare workers and seniors around the state. What will happen to Medicaid if this amendment doesn't pass? Well, state officials are telling us that all sorts of dire consequences will happen. Well, let me tell you some reasons why this is not going to happen, and that I feel we are being misled. First of all, there are proposals that are solutions to solve this problem, and we may or may not get into that later, but let me tell you the new breaking news that I've gathered. And the reasons that I believe this budget, the reasons that I believe that all these dire consequences where prisoners are going to be released on the streets and our grandmoms are going to be thrown out of nursing homes onto the street and workers are going to be laid off across the state, why I don't believe this is going to happen. First, the legislature knew long before the 2012 the legislative session started that they had to deal with and solve the budget crisis. You remember that, right? It was in the papers often. So think about this. If the legislators felt that all the dire consequences they're now warning us will happen if voters don't pass this amendment, would legislative leaders waited until the last day and the last hour to address the budget? Doesn't that give you pause? Second, while the legislature is asking voters to raise the principal of the trust fund, they are asking for a hefty pay raise. Remember that 67% pay raise? It's on the ballot in November. Third, would the state, well, first of all, the administrative clerk is also raising their salaries. In fact, I just pulled off a newspaper article, and it has big raises despite cutbacks. And it talks about how the court system has struggled with budget cuts. Well, then why are they now giving hefty pay raises to some of their employees? A third reason why I don't believe these dire consequences are going to happen. The state is spending $3 million on this special election. I asked about that, and I was told, as the general public was told, that we had to hold a special election in September, just before the November general election, because the next budget cycle started October 1st. Well, I just pulled off, since I've been home, an article on AL.com, and by the way, I just emailed it to you, and this is unbelievable. The vote originally to ask for an amendment to bail out the budget was going to be placed on the November ballot. They didn't. They changed the date when they realized that it might not pass. So the state is spending $3 million because they expect a low voter turnout on a special election 2 months before the general election.
Wait a minute. It was originally scheduled to be on the November 6th ballot?
Yes. The article this morning, this is by David White of the Birmingham News. Actually, it's dated yesterday, September 12th. I mean, I have been incensed. Talk about setting your hair on fire. When I read this just before I dialed in, I thought, this is a scam. This is unbelievable. These legislators tell us to trust them, that they need 3 months or 3 years to get our costs under control. And how can we trust them when they tell us we have to have a special election and spend $3 million for it, and we learned that originally it was going to be on the November ballot until they feared it would fail. I tell you, so I've just given you some things that I listed after coming home from this press conference thinking, you know, all these scare tactics, and it's really unfortunate. Our seniors, the children's hospitals, the state workers, they really believe these scare tactics. But if these scare tactics had any modicum of possibility of coming true, would all the things that I just listed have happened? So anyway, I want to get that off my chest because I am really bothered by this when they continually tell us, you must trust us.
And I had an article that I read that from a Ron in Andalusia Star News that, you know, it's dated back in February 7th, this bill was. It was introduced on the very first day of the start of the session, yet they make it out as if they had the hardest time, you know, looking at all the different solutions, and this was the best they could do. But they had it at the very beginning.
once again, those of us who read the newspapers and don't just listen to what we're told, we know that once the governor came out, and again, I have applauded him over and over for trying to address and attack the structural imbalance of the state general fund in terms of the distribution of tax revenues. And let me go on a tangent a little bit and explain that, because if this structural imbalance is not solved, then we will never have a balanced general fund budget, because most of the growth taxes go into education, and most of the static taxes go into the general fund. So when the governor comes out and says we've got to combine these two funds like every other state in the nation except one does, the legislative leaders balked. But AEA, that we thought had been diminished in its influence, AEA doesn't want this. So they went to the legislative leaders, they lobbied them, and guess what? The legislative leaders refused to work with the governor to correct this structural imbalance of the funds, and we have a constitutional amendment instead. So, that probably happened at the beginning. When did you say that was dated? In February?
February the 7th, the first day of the session.
That probably happened, before the special session started, because we didn't hear any more from our governor. And then this budget was supposed to be in such crisis, yet they never found time to address it and solve the problem until the very last day. And at midnight, when the hour would have struck the session, the session legally over, 15 minutes, I'm told, before midnight, they said they passed this constitutional amendment. So it does seem to tie in together.
Well, the union is very strong, and Mr. Finn Larson is here with us. He is with the Christian Educators Association International, and, we're just hoping that really more people would pay attention to who they joined up to. And
yes.
Mr. Finn, this is an example, even here in Alabama, very conservative state. We just turned over a leaf and had the major, really mostly conservatives, we thought, but I think it was Orr and Pittman are the ones whose name is on the line for this bill, SB 147, presented on February 7th, probably hatched last year, Ms. Lois, when the AEA went to them. So I think we've got to send a signal. Can we do something? Because it just really sounds like backroom dealings, too much of it.
I'm afraid it harms our faith in truth and transparency, and it pains me to say that. But, bottom line, conservative voters who want to send a message to our good legislators. I'm going to go off on a tangent and come back here about the bottom line. John Rice, who is a former state senator and who is helping get the word out and working himself, he's working it's amazing that he's still standing and still sleeping, but he said at the press conference today that as he's talking with legislators, they are very disappointed that their leaders did not give them information. They gave them the scare tactics. They didn't give them the information that we have been researching and learning. And he says many of the legislators he's talking to, and I know I'm hearing some myself, are voting no on this amendment. And a few of them, like Senator Paul Bussmann, are even having press conferences saying, vote no on this amendment. Let us get back in session and do our job. And, new information has come to light. So, back to the bottom line, if conservative voters really want to send a message to our legislators, they should vote no, because a no vote will force the legislature to finally fix the budget problems and do their job as they are required to do under the Constitution. On the other hand, a yes vote will kill that goose that lays the golden eggs, because that's what the ATF is, and it will bust the trust for future generations. Because I want to emphasize that this amendment redefines income and has a new formula to distribute revenues from the gas and oil proceeds. So we are going to take 20% of that trust fund principal, and then we're going to siphon off half the gas and oil revenues that flow into the trust fund. So this fund, which was set up to be held in perpetuity for future generations, will most likely be bankrupt, according to people who are smarter than I am in finances, in a decade or so. I mean, we
Ms. Lois?
Not in the sand.
I'm sorry, Ms. Lois. Ms. Barbara had mentioned, ways that we really could come up with the money that would go back to work. And I know I saw Quinn Hillier with his presentation of, the option for early retirement for a lot of state employees. That would solve the problem pretty quick. And I know, Ms. Barbara, you were talking about another one about, maybe 60-something million could be saved with assisted living.
Absolutely. In fact, there is no shortage of solutions. There's only a shortage of commitment to do this. The early retirement option will save between $68 and $95 million a year. The assisted living, a federal waiver for Medicaid that you just mentioned, will save $48 million a year. And the list goes on. So there are
somebody even mentioned
solutions.
the tobacco tax, too, Ms. Lois. So that would take care of it all.
Yes, and one of senators who also has publicly opposed this amendment says that he has even recommended consolidating some agencies. There are so many things that can be done that they just need to do their work. And they should have never put this on the ballot when they were legally required to balance the budget, and they didn't do it. So I just hope that voters will surprise these legislative leaders who didn't fully inform their legislators. They certainly haven't informed the news media. They certainly haven't informed voters about the true state of the budget. In fact, if this fails, it's not like suddenly you're going to have to cut the budget 50% or 75% as we're hearing. It will be cut 10.9%. It will be short of that, of making their budgeted expenses. So, there are solutions, and, we give it to them. We are in tough times. We don't deny that. And it's never easy to cut spending, waste, inefficiencies, but you can do it. Nations, all throughout this nation, states are having to do it. And they don't have any smarter legislators or more ethical legislators than we do. So our legislators can do it. We're just going to have to put our foot down and say, stop playing footsies with AEA and do your job and respond to your constituents, not to a lobbyist, a special interest here that we thought a Republican supermajority was going to diminish the influence of.
If our governor and our Republican legislators watched the Republican National Convention, they would have seen several instances of various states highlighted, like Ohio with Governor John Kasich, that started in the red and are now in the black, and have dealt with their budget crisis effectively and successfully. And there are other states as well who've done so, So I don't know whether they didn't keep up with that, don't know about that, but certainly we can not only create our own solutions, but we could also find out some of the things that were done in other places that help bring them out of their budget crisis.
Absolutely.
Wow.
And you know, one other thing that
this.
I learned this morning from the press conference, again, truth and transparency are so important. You know, as I mentioned a minute ago, our budget is short $145 million for the budget that they want to have of $1.67 billion. John Rice pointed out this morning that when they made that draft budget, they did not even include the trust fund capital revenues of between $100 million and $200 million every year. That's not even included in this.
Oh my goodness.
I mean, I told you I felt like my hair had been set on fire. I just hope we can somehow get this kind of information out to our conservative voters and let them know that the sky is not falling.
Thank you, Miss Lois. Thank you, Miss Lois. Go ahead, Miss Barbara.
I was wondering, are you familiar with the Governor's Commission on Government Efficiency, a report that contains 15 solutions for budget crisis that has not been released?
Barbara, I'm so glad you brought that up. There was a person at the press conference this morning that announced that since that has been finalized and as of this past January, but has not been released, and which does include, as you just mentioned, many ways to cut waste and spending. She is filing a Freedom of Information Act to get that report. I hope she gets it before next Tuesday, which probably isn't likely, but it's a shame. But yes, there's some more solutions that are contained in that, obviously, that the public has not been advised of yet.
Well, you know, it might be helpful, too, to call the governor's office and ask that he release that report that was finalized in January, since it is now September.
Yes, we don't understand why it hasn't been released, and it's my understanding that she is in contact with the governor's office. But as you pointed out, there are hundreds of millions of dollars that we have identified just in this short time that we're aware of. And experts are surely aware of many more. And I want to thank so much our own Alabama think tank, the Alabama Policy Institute, that has been so helpful in coming up with some of these ways that the state can cut costs, cut waste, and find and efficiencies. For instance, they even found that the state has 500 properties that they didn't know it had and that are not in use.
Oh, my.
I want to just stress this, because did I understand you to say that the money that we get from the Alabama Trust Fund, which is almost $100 million, wasn't even included as part of the budget?
That's what former State Senator John Rice said this morning, and he has really studied this issue. So there seems to be a little gamesmanship going on here.
Oh, what a shame. What a shame. Well, I think it's time for us to do a lot of praying, and I pray really that a lot of the teachers will, choose to see the truth. I think when they're, saying the sky's falling, if it was really falling, it'd be something different. But when it's all a bunch of hoaxes and lies, how can we stand by and ignore the truth, Ms. Lois? We cannot.
Yes. Absolutely. And again, if the sky were falling, the legislature would not have stood by during that legislative session and waited to the very last day and the very last hour to even address this budget. And they wouldn't be paying $3 million for a special election when they could have put this on the November 6th ballot and the list, and they wouldn't be asking for that hefty pay raise in November.
By the way, add into this, Miss Lois, they would have okayed $100 million for iPads for our 9th through 12th graders.
So you see, it just raises questions, doesn't it? But hopefully this help allay fears of the people who really have been convinced by all this hype and scare tactics, and hopefully they will become a little embittered and think, wait a minute, I expect truth and transparency from my elected officials, and I am going to hold them accountable, and I'm going to vote no on Tuesday, so they will be forced to do their job.
We need to come out en masse